We're excited to welcome on our guest for this week's Jenkins Jonez and Friends, Tashawn Reed of The Athletic. His brilliant podcast, Between the Lines, a podcast about race and diversity in the NFL, just wrapped up on March 7th. You can find that either in The Athletic's football feed or it now has its own feed wherever you get your podcasts. I know Tyler and John and I have all been listening to it and really enjoying it. Tashawn, thanks so much for making time to come on the show, man. We appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, y'all. Appreciate that, all that promo right there.
We're professional now. We just get all the promo out, we bang it and then boom, we're done. Now we can talk like human beings.
Get to the shits now.
You feel me? I mentioned how detailed and how comprehensive, all the research that you put into this project was. And, there was a lot that I learned here. There were a lot of, eye openers, for me listening to this. And one was, I realized that I was not all the way completely familiar with the origin of the Rooney Rule, right? Like I wasn't naive enough to think that the NFL did that shit out of the goodness of their own heart. I just always kind of thought that there were probably grumblings from, within the NFL workforce. But, you went into the history about how there was an outside group that did some independent research and had Johnny Cochran as lead counsel. So the NFL decided to get ahead of that shit because they knew a lawsuit was coming, right? So, that was an eye opener for me. I wasn't quite aware of the specifics of that. So I'm wondering, like, during all the research that you've done, on this project, what was like the biggest eye opener for you?
I think for me, it wasn't like one individual thing. It's just as I reported it out, like I just became more aware of like just how comprehensive the issue is in terms of the NFL's race problem. Like we always point towards the owners for the lack of black head coaches, which they are obviously very culpable for that being an issue. But it's like it's kind of corny, but it's like it's on everybody really. Like it's the players, because of the way that they've been suppressed, they don't feel comfortable using their leverage and their power like a Colin Kaepernick did to try to push for change. Like it doesn't really happen that much, even now, amongst the coaching ranks. Once we do have black head coaches that get in some spots, a lot of times they don't hire black coordinators or black quarterback coaches or promote them to positions that lead to head coaching jobs. Black GMs, a lot of times they hire white head coaches. And promote white people throughout their support staff. Obviously, owners, there ain't no black people there, but the owners, we all know what their issue is in terms of this and why they behave that way. And then me as media, like, ain't that many black reporters out here either, which I don't know if people, keep that in mind all the time. And, a lot of these publications, it's starting to change now with like the summer of 2020. Like I said, it's becoming trendy now, but historically, it's something that you didn't really cover because of that old objective mindset, like, oh, that's politics, it's going to make us lose our readership and all that kind of shit. And so, like, it's on us, too, to make sure it's a constant conversation and not just something that we talk about during Black History Month, during those glorious 28 days. And, when a hiring cycle is up or there's a lawsuit from Brian Flores or like there's something, or Colin Kaepernick happens, like, you can't just talk about it when it's a flashpoint moment that's going to get you a lot of clicks. Like, it's got to be something that you talk about year round, like, because it's a year round thing. It's evergreen. Unfortunately, it's something that's always the case. And so it's going to take all of that, plus probably external pressure, like lawsuits, the threat of lawsuits or sponsorship dollars being potentially stripped away. Like, the best example of that is probably what we saw with the Washington football team, with them changing their team name. That was because of sponsorship dollars. And so it's going to be something like there is no like quick one size fits all solution for this. It's going to take a lot of time. And unless it's a comprehensive effort from everybody, it's just never going to change. And again, it's not an NFL exclusive thing. Like, that's America. Like, this is what this country was built on. Like, as much as people want to run from it, like, it's a racist country and it's built on systemic racism and slavery and stealing people's land that wasn't theirs. And like, that is in our infrastructure. It always has been. And that's how it was designed. And so changing that isn't easy. Obviously, it's been in place for hundreds of years. But the only way to do so is a collective effort and surge that's constant and doesn't waver. Because if it wavers, then you get all that shit starts to strip back and it starts to revert. And then you get in that cycle that never really ends. And so that's what I kind of already knew that, but I just analyze, because every episode, like episode 1 is kind of the historical context, and episode 2 is the players, episode 3 is the coaches, episode 4 is executives, and episode 5 is sort of taking a look at everything comprehensively. And so, like, getting into the granular details of how race impacts things at every level just gave me a greater appreciation for like how much shit actually needs to be improved and done for there to be sustained change, not just these these brief, glimpses of hope. When we get like in '07 after Tony Dungy and Lovie Smith faced off in the Super Bowl, we have 7 black head coaches. Or right now, I think we have 5 black GMs, or no, we have 8 black GMs and 5 black team presidents. But will that be sustained? Like, no, it's not, unless, those things that I mentioned change. And so I think that was really my biggest takeaway from this project throughout all my time working on it. And that's really kind of what I landed on in episode 5 at the end, where I kind of gave a monologue, just kind of giving my thoughts on everything.
For sure. And if we could stay on the Rooney Rule for just a second more, I'm curious on your thoughts of it. I know it's easy to get delusional with it given its underwhelming results, but I personally think it's still very much needed for a number of reasons. And, I'll get into my reasoning why I feel that way, but I'm curious to hear on, where you stand first.
Yeah, I mean, like, the premise of it is cool. It's just, it doesn't have any actual backbone. Like, if they break it, which they do every year, nothing happens. So, like, why would I stop breaking it? Like, there's no consequence. There's no checks and balances. And so it's like, it's a great rule in theory, but if you just let people break it and nothing happens to them, it's pretty useless. And so there has to be some sort of enforcement component, like, in these obvious situations where, like, clearly it's a sham interview and they knew who they were going to hire from the jump, and they're just interviewing a couple random black people just to say they did. Like, there has to be some sort of recourse. And really the only time that happened is, I believe it was with the Lions that one year, where they got a fine. And even then the fine was like, 6 figures. Like, I ain't shit to the NFL team. Like, they don't care about that. And so, like, it has to be like some sort of actual, like, consequence that they would care about incurring to really make them follow that rule. Otherwise, it's just like a light suggestion, which obviously is not going to do anything.
Okay. So where I'm at with the Rooney Rule, one, I think that, a lot of people are hardwired to think that if a solution isn't absolute and doesn't comprehensively and holistically solve a problem, then that solution has no merit. And I just wholeheartedly, absolutely disagree with that line of thinking. The results of the Rooney Rule are underwhelming for sure. It doesn't really have a lot of teeth, but I don't think you really put that onus on the rule itself. I think that, the brunt of the blame should be placed on the people making these hiring decisions. And secondly, I think that, there are all types of hurdles that diverse coaches face, and we need to, combat these hurdles at every step in the process. And one of those hurdles is just getting an interview, right? Black coaches and diverse coaches are not plugged into a lot of these networks that white coaches are hired from. They're not in these, good old boys networks that a lot of their white counterparts maneuver in. And I just do not know how you, combat that without the Rooney Rule. Like, how do you fix that? How do you tell these 75-year-old white owners that they need to embrace black people more in their personal life, that they need to, invite more black people to Thanksgiving, get in group chats with black people, right? Like, I just don't see a viable alternative. And like I said, I see the flaws of the Rooney Rule clear as day, but, I think that falls on the people making the hiring decisions, not necessarily on the rule itself.
Well, I don't think the Rooney Rule is going to do those things that you mentioned there. Like, there is really no onus on them to build those relationships just because the Rooney Rule exists. I think it has to be more so supplemental programs that are put in place, which they used to have. Something that Ron Rivera, who I interviewed for the series, said when he was up and coming coach back in the 90s and early 2000s, they had this sort of kind of minority coaches summit where they had opportunity to meet with ownership and build relationships. And that's where he met the Spanos family, who owns the Chargers. And they ended up hiring him as a coordinator a couple years later. And when he was interviewing for the Panthers head coaching job, they called Jerry Richardson, who passed away. He called the Spanos family for recommendation, and they gave a good one because they had a relationship with him because he met them at that summit. And so, like, that's an example of, that sort of relationship paying off. But then they took that program away. They most recently, they brought it back last year, I believe. And so we'll see if that provides some different results. But it can't just be the Rooney Rule. Like, you got to have formalized programs like that where they can network, not just with owners, but GMs, head coaches, other decision makers, and learn how to angle themselves towards these positions and make relationships, because relationships is probably the biggest factor when it comes to these head coaching hires. Like, if you're running $1 billion corporation, you're not going to hire somebody to effectively run it, or the most important component of it, that you don't have a good relationship with. Like, that's just stupid. Nobody would do that. But if there's nothing that like provides a forum for them to build those relationships with people that don't look like them and that aren't in their bubble, how would they ever form those relationships? And so that's where, to me, not just on the decision makers, not just the owners, that's where the league office comes in. Y'all have to create some more of these. Like I said, they're bringing some of them back, but you have to make sure that they're actually like effective and not just there for show and shake hands and kiss babies and take some pictures and post some shit online. Like it has to actually be like useful. And so there's always more they can do. It can't just be if it's just the Rooney Rule. Like I said, it might as well. It's useless to me. Like it has to be supplemented by consequence if you don't follow it, and also supplemental programs that support it and lift it up, and help those required interviews for the head coaching jobs, for the GM jobs, be interviews with people that they actually know. Because if you just have them interview a bunch of strangers, they're not hiring those strangers. That's why the numbers are what they are now. And I can't really knock them for that. I can knock them for not making a better effort to go make the relationships. But, like these people, they're rich white billionaires. Like, what reason do they have to get outside their bubble? And so unless you, like, make them, basically, they're not going to do it. And so that comes on the league office, which I know they don't have all the power. Like, ultimately, they work for the owners. And so that's where that kind of conflict happens. So, like, to a degree, the owners have to be willing to do it. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. But I do think the league office can do a better job in steering them in the right direction.